So the title, as you have seen here, is Building the Value SaaS Way. And before I go there, what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with a small story, right? And this is a small story that I have come to witness through the last 10 years of my experience of working with a lot of Indian founders. And I like to call this as the story of 3 Indian founders on a beach. I've worked with many of them, and I can put them into these 3 different buckets or this category, right? The 3 Indian founders on a beach. So the first person, right, in the last 10 years that I've seen is what I like to call as a surfer. Like, this is a person who is doing surfing. He's always chasing the next big trend that is there. It could be mobile apps, it could be e-commerce, it could be group buying, it could be cab commerce, or it could be fintech, but always looking at the next big trend that is coming. And the most recent ones you would have heard is AI and ML. And this is a person who gets kicked in looking at that new trend, maybe putting together a business pitch deck, and then talking to investors and saying that this is what I want to go after and this is what I will win. Now, the way the surfer fraternity works is it's a very, very closed-knit group, right? Usually you will see people from prestigious colleges like IIT and IIM. These are the folks who put together these visionary statements and say that this is the next big trend to ride. And they'll also have these few veterans who would have tried it in the past and now become retired and strolling around in the beach. And they may be even blind to what is happening right now. But what they would do is these new surfers would go to these blind men on the beach and say, I want to ride this tide. Can you give me $1 million? And these folks will say, oh, I can hear the sounds of the wave. Why do you need only $1 million? Take 10. And then say, go and win it. Because when you win that kind of game, what happens is you get featured in the Time magazine where, you are called as the business person of the year, the entrepreneur of the year, and reporters run after you. You get great accolades instantly, and also you get a lot of money instantly, right? So this is what I call as a surfer. And the surfer is someone that we have seen a lot. Like, if I were to share some example, then there are people like Kunal Bell, and there are people like most recently Ritesh Agarwal of Oyo, who are examples of this, right? So this is the first type of entrepreneur. The second type that I have come to see is what I call as a voyager. And so the second type of founder that I see is what I call as a voyager. If you think about any startup is like this journey after a treasure island, right? Usually we focus mostly on the ships that we have built. We don't talk about where are we going after. And when we go to a certain journey, and when we are taking a boat to go there, we always leverage some tailwind. There are new trends that are happening, that are shaping up. And those trends are what allow you to kind of drive towards that new treasure island, right? So these are people who have been in past treasure island journeys, and then they feel that in the past journey, they couldn't go to the treasure island that they thought was the most relevant. And therefore, they come back to the same blind man on the beach and then say, fund my voyage. I know the business plan in my head through my past experience, and I can take a ship maybe to a treasure island which was 15 degrees northeast of what I already conquered, and maybe I can get the riches and I'll come back and share it with you. And then the same blind man will tell these type of founders saying, why do you need $1 million? I'll give you 10 million, and then they will send them off this particular journey. Now, after the stories of surfers are over, the Time magazine reporter come back to these voyagers and then say, let me write about your story, because this is also very, very fascinating to write about, right? And if I were to talk about some examples from the last 10 years that I have seen, I have closely looked at, there is this company called Dhruva, which is based out of Pune. They build disaster recovery software, and they are a 100 million ARR company, and they are one of the largest B2B companies from India selling to the rest of the world. These are engineers who came out of Symantec, and they built the same product that they built in this large MNC, but they were able to build a new sales and marketing team, new product team, replicate it, and they did not even go 15 degrees northeast to the treasure island that they initially conquered. They went after the same treasure island, and then they made a great business out of that. Now, in case of surfer and voyager, what happens is you get this instant gratification like I talked about. Now, the third type of founder that I like to call is what I say is a fisherman, right? A fisherman is someone who is going into a corner in the sea and then saying, I'm going to just focus on this particular area. I know that there will be fish here. So let me just spend my time here, catch a little bit of fish, and then feed myself, feed my family, sell a little extra into the market. And he's looking at the surfers and these voyages, and he's wondering, right? These are people that are dream chasers. Right? I'm the one that is putting food on the table. So I don't understand why the entire media or the world is going after that. He just, does this, and then he says, how do I care? I enjoy doing the fishing, so let me go and do that fishing myself. And like this, days becomes weeks, weeks becomes month become year, and you look at 10 years, and suddenly this small fishing expedition, fishing boat that this fisherman had becomes a huge fishing magnet. And then after that, all these Time reporters come running after them, right? Saying that what a great story of a fisherman who built this great fishing magnet, right? Now, I'm not saying that one is better than other, just that there are three different types. What has to be kept in mind is that they involve different skill. When you're a surfer, you're always on the lookout for the next big trend. You're always looking out for the next tide to ride. You don't care about the ones that you already are. So you have to almost be unfaithful to the one that you already are on. So the skill that is involved is how can you anticipate the next tide and jump to it, and make sure that you don't hurt yourself in the process. And that's the skill, the storytelling skill, your ability to wow people, bedazzle them, and say that, yeah, this is the next big thing that is going to happen. If you don't come along with me, then you will get lost, right? And you get that instant gratification there. Immediately a hero or a star. And most of us do startup because we imagine ourselves there. We've seen another person similar to us on the Time magazine cover, and we think that it could have been me. And that is what powers a lot of us in becoming that founder and the entrepreneur. Compare that with a fisherman. It's a boring job. It is slow and steady, but eventually you win. It is not instant gratification. It is delayed gratification. There, you have to patiently learn a skill of not getting distracted, not getting bothered by how people are going to compare you and say, hey, why are you wasting your life? Why are you doing this boring thing? Even your family may not appreciate it, but over a period of time, you become well. So one is instant gratification, another is a delayed gratification, and different founders make those choices on which path that they want to take. Now, if you had some experience in some company building a certain offering or a product or certain business, you come from a business family, you will take the Voyager approach. So they are all different skills. They all are getting tested by the vagaries of the sea, the uncertainties, all of this happens. The trouble is not like which one you want to be, but you have to know, like if you are on a certain path, that's the skill that you need to have. Now, I don't have a point of view on which one should anyone take. If you take this, there are many founders who have become successful in the surfer way. There are many who have become successful in the Voyager, in the fisherman way. If I were to give you the example of fishermen in India, 2015, the front page cover of Forbes India was Kunal Bell. 2016 was Girish of Fresh Desk. And then 2017 was Zoho. Zoho was started in 1994. It declared that they will build SaaS companies in 2007. By 2015, they become a $500 million revenue company and became a formidable competitor to Salesforce, which they declared in 2007. Different skills, different type of founder, different type of paths that they took. The trouble that I have is that the story doesn't stop here. What ends up happening is that if you want to be a fisherman founder, but if you are trying to do surfing, that's where the problem comes. In fact, the way I'd like to say is that don't surf inside a pond. Right? Most of us try to surf inside a pond where there are no waves that are going to come. If you're a machine learning startup, you're an AI startup, surfs and the tides related to AI and machine learning is not happening in India. They are happening in Hawaii. The technology equivalent of that is this Silicon Valley. Sometimes founders have this mistaken belief that when they are surfing inside that pond, maybe there is an unerupted volcano that will erupt, or maybe that's what their horoscope has said that will happen to them, and therefore they're still trying to just surf inside the pond. And that is where it becomes a big trouble. So more than what you do or even how you do in startup, it becomes important where you do it, right? If you are building a deep tech, cutting edge technology company, startup, then you are better off in those places where those serves and tides are appreciated, are supported, are funded, and also find the exits we initially spoke about, right? So these are the type of founders that are there. And then the beginning of this year, COVID happened, right? Now, a lot of things in this got disturbed. So I want to reflect a little back on what that means. So first and foremost, COVID meant like a invisible tsunami. It came and created this huge impact on all of us. We couldn't see it, but the impact of what has happened with COVID is not any lesser than the tsunami that we faced a few years ago in India, or the earthquake that we faced in Gujarat like decade 15 years ago. The impact has been really, really deep. Now, it almost rewired the world. If you remember the scene from the movie Matrix, this is as if the world was rewired. There's a deja vu feeling that Neo has. That's what most of us feel right now, right? If you think about business as a game of chess, it feels like it has taken the chessboard and completely shaken it. And whatever advantages certain players had before, that has been completely changed. The pieces have changed. So in some cases, there are companies who have had 90% dip in their revenue, and in some cases, there are businesses which have grown 8x, 12x, or even 22x if you look at companies like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, right? So what has happened is it's almost led to creation of this era. What I like to say is BC versus AC, before COVID and after COVID. And after COVID means that people have to be distant from each other, which means that we are talking about creation of a new type of economy, an isolation economy, so to say. So in this, what are things that are relevant? What are things that have changed? So one of the things that people have realized is that in the last 10 years, not just India, across the world, one of the most celebrated thing was growth at all cost. Or this famous book called Blitzscaling, just scale like crazy. But all of that blitz scale now has only led to a blitz fail, right? And what that has meant is many of the servers have been caught naked. And we know those examples where the valuations have taken not just serious haircut, but complete redefinition. Companies like Oyo or WeWork. But on the other hand, there are many things that have not changed. So you might have heard of this phrase called software is eating the world. Right? It was coined by Mark Anderson in 2011. By 2015, people started saying software is eating the world, but SaaS is eating software, because SaaS is growing faster than the growth rate of software itself in terms of the adoption in the industry. Now, in 2020, it would only be appropriate to say that SaaS is gobbling the world, right? So if it was eating in 2015, but in 2020, it has been gobbling, and a lot of SaaS companies you've seen have grown like crazy in the last 2 months. In fact, so much so that Satya Nadella gave this quote recently to a business magazine, and he said that the digital transformation that we were expecting from enterprises in 2 years, all of that just happened in 2 months. Many of you would have seen the crazy hockey stick growth of Microsoft Teams, which grew 18 to 22x in a matter of 2 to 3 months. Right? So some have grown really well, and some have taken a huge impact. Now, what is the relevance of all of this to today's topic, right? So today's topic is about value SaaS. Before we talk more about the relevance, let me just broadly describe what value SaaS is. Value SaaS at the first means that it is not vanity SaaS, and we'll see what vanity SaaS is. Vanity SaaS is raising $6 million to getting to $1 million in revenue, spending $20 million to get to about 5 or 3 million in revenue. And many value-based companies are really, really good at that, because capital was available aplenty, and people just had to say, hey, here is an idea that I'm trying, and then they will get a lot of money, right? And using that money to be able to get to 1 million, 2 million is what many people have been successfully been able to do. But what you really want is not that. What you want is to build a startup where if you feed $1, it generates more than $1, maybe $6. But if that is not the case, then it is not a business. I like to say this, which is, if a hobby that makes money is a startup that doesn't make money is a hobby. So if it is a startup, if it is a business, you put $1, it should be able to generate more than $1, ideally $3. Like great if it generates $6. What value SaaS means is that you will never compromise the unit economics, the basics of the business, that the lifetime value of the customer is always way more than the cost of acquiring that customer, right? And you will never compromise that for growth. For the last decade or so, valuation was driven by growth. Now that's no more the case. But value SaaS as a way of doing it was already advocating that we always look at uncompromising unit economics first. It also meant that no massive fundraise before you have figured out what your SaaS flywheel looks like. How are you going to generate that $1? How are you going to bring in a new customer? How are they going to use your SaaS product? And how are they going to continue to pay more money over the period of months that they stay with you, right? It also means, we define it in very, very number driven terms. We say that you should be able to get to $1 million in annual recurring revenue with less than 200,000 of any externally invested capital. So if you have a business which has some of these characteristics, then that is a value SaaS business. Now, why do we have to do value SaaS? Some of it we talked about in terms of the aftermath of COVID, but let's do a recap, right? One is that as a founder, you want to be the hero. You don't want to be a statistic, right? When you raise a lot of money, you're working with an investor collective. For the investor, there are 10 bets, but for you, you are that only single bet when you're doing that startup. So you have to be the winning gladiator. You can't say that I was one out of the 10 attempt that an investor tried. And that becomes the fundamental difference. And if you keep your fate in your control, I love this quote from this philosopher called Pierre. You must be in control of your fate or somebody else will control it, right? As a founder, most of us get started in building a startup is because we feel that we are in control of the journey that we are taking. And making sure that you are in control of that fate is very, very critical. Right? And that is why you want to build this value SaaS. Now, again, the reference back to the investors, you want to be the chess player and not the chess piece. And if you build a value SaaS where you are able to generate more than $1 for the dollar that you have invested, then you are in control of your direction. You don't have to go and tell somebody a story on why a possible revenue will be generated, but you will say, this is exactly how I will generate. I can use a little bit more money from you to scale how I know I have created a cash generating engine. Now, let's talk for a few minutes on how to build value SaaS, right? So first and foremost, whenever we work with founders, we say that find a high value problem. If you're solving a very low value problem, then you can't build a cash generating machine. You can't build a value SaaS. So the first step, it always starts with finding a high value problem from the domains that you come from. And the next most important thing that we talk about is, as founders, as software engineers, most of us think about building a product in terms of what are the features that I need to build. But that is not what you want to think about. You want to think about value. And this is something that we talk about internally quite often, quite a lot. We say there is difference between feature, benefit, and value. And we shouldn't conflate the two. And there is a very, very simple distinction that can be drawn, right? This is based on where each of them reside, where each of them stay. Feature is a property of the product. It is an aspect, it's an attribute of the product. So they reside on the product. On the other hand, benefit is a set of words which describe the gain in customer's life due to use of the feature of the product, right? And value may be the same set of keywords that are used to describe the benefit, but that resides in the heads of the customer, right? So in this example, blue is a feature of the product called box. So blue is an attribute of the box itself. But based on that, you are able to match a certain decor is how you can frame the benefit. And there are specific people who care about blue as the color of the box. is the value that specific customers are going to get. So we end up building feature, never translate into benefit so that it can be understood by the customer. So we insist on saying that talk to the customer, frame your feature in the language of benefit, and confirm it with customer to say that this is indeed going to generate value for the customer. And if you do this step, you can shave literally 2 years, 18 months, 6 months, in several cases that we've seen where like people had this conversation and they were able to orient the direction of their startups into the value direction as opposed to endlessly getting spiraled into a feature creep. So this is another very important next step. Once you have identified a high value problem, you're talking in the value language, the benefit language as opposed to the feature language, is to make sure that the price is anchored on the value. And this is something that we call as value-based pricing. You might have seen this, right? The same 50 paisa pouch water packet, if it is bought in a 5-star hotel, then we pay 50 rupees for that. Because pricing is always to price the customer. You don't price the product. Right? Most of us end up saying that I need to price the product. But the way you think about pricing is you price it based on what is the value that the other person is giving. In the case of the water example, when it is purchased in a street pouch, right, the value is just quenching thirst. But when it is purchased in a hotel, a 5-star hotel, what is being sold is that this is high quality as signaled by making it available in that 5-star hotel. So they would have gone through extra steps in making sure that the quality check is really, really high. So it is the solving the perception of fear there, saying that this is not bad quality water is what we are paying for, and not the quenching of the thirst itself when we pay 50 rupees for water in a hotel setting or an environment. And finally, design a brand that can win hearts and minds at a global level. So you start with a high value problem. You focus on the value conversation, not on the features. You make sure that you hook or align your pricing with value. And as you are able to deliver more value to your customers, you are able to increase your pricing. You are able to increase the revenue that you make from the customers. And to protect your business, you build a brand. Right? Most of the successful SaaS businesses that have been built globally is because they built a strong moat using a loved brand. So these are 4 very, very high level steps that you can use to build a value SaaS business. And you do this keeping the entire business of the cash generating machine, making sure that you are creating and optimizing an entire SaaS flywheel or throughput. Startups end up optimizing for valuation. But if you just focus on making sure that you're optimizing for your monthly recurring revenue or your annual recurring revenue in a way that a customer walks in, you are able to attract him, engage him through a sales process, in the sales conversation, convince him and sell him the value instead of the features, and make sure that he sees that value every month. And therefore you are able to retain him and you are able to sell him additional value. Therefore you are able to expand your own revenue. So much so that he gets delighted that he's referring back customers to you. And that's how this flywheel is getting spinned forward to make sure that if you made $100 this year, then you make $110, $120 or $130 next year from the same cohort or set of customers, right? And how do you optimize the SaaS flywheel is the core job of a value SaaS company that translates the value SaaS into $1 in, more than $1 out. Right? Just to summarize, the value SaaS gameplay is about being in control of your fate as a founder. And if you play the startup game this way, you are in a lot more control. Number 2, Indian founders continue to have SaaS advantage globally, even after post-COVID, right? And you build efficient SaaS flywheel by making sure that you solve a high value problem, align the value, and making sure that you are creating a brand that wins minds and hearts. Right? So with that, the first part of what I wanted to share, it comes to an end. And Hiranmay, back to you to help moderate questions.
Absolutely. Now I'm tempting to purchase your book and read more. Imagine, and I recommend everybody who are listening to you should go through your book. And I think what you focused is very fundamental. First of all, the distinction that you brought in that discussion, that how you can distinguish between feature and then move to a value, and which comes from exactly how the proposition is very unique. And this is probably every aspiring entrepreneur need to think through. However, many entrepreneurs these days kind of try to copycat business, this for that, and then they struggle at some point of time. So I think you really summed up well. And the attributes that you mentioned about surfing and fishing actually is very, very important. And one thing is, I mean, you mentioned about Girish, his dear friend, you mentioned about Kunal Bal. This is very, very interesting. How do an entrepreneur know what he is good at, whether at surfing, fishing? Is there a litmus test, or how do you figure it out? That's one question that I see on the Facebook Live.
So internally, we talk about this whole idea of a founder should transform from an I-shaped individual to a T-shaped individual. We don't have the visual here. Happy to share that later. Each of us, we come with one thing that we are really good at, right? And that is a specialization that we go after. Most of the time, society asks us to become a specialist in accounting, specialist in sales, specialist in something, right? But a founder is someone who's very different from a specialist. He is a jack of many trades, right? So what a founder needs to know is he not only needs to know this one thing, which may be development skills or which may be sales skills, but he needs to know a little bit more. And there are a few things that we list. One is decision making under uncertainty. Then the other is storytelling. The other is how are you able to attract a team? And when it comes to the SaaS context, we say you need to understand strategy, which is a fancy word for what is the game you are playing. Marketing, which is about saying, can you convert strangers into fans? Sales is like, a little bit of sales where you say, are you able to persuade someone to help them do things differently, right? So, and then product is, are you able to understand somebody's requirement and shape something that will solve a problem for someone? So these are all different, like little bit of this that a founder needs to have. Now, surfer is someone who's really good at like doing that storytelling part, right? So if you imagine an I shape and a T shape, surfer is someone who has maybe 90% of only storytelling, right? So if somebody is really good at inspiring someone, saying that this is what we need to do, this is where we go, that is what they get excited by, then they take the surfing route. So if you take the example of any of the founders that have raised boatloads of money, you will see that they are inspiring, they're charismatic, their ability to tell story and wow audiences what sets them apart, right? So that's a skill that every founder needs to learn, but surfer has that at 90% quantity. So you will know that where do I belong, right? Versus some people who would rather want to do things small and they would want to live a minimalist lifestyle and they are willing to wait for something big to come over a period of time, right? And you would see that, in general in life, they've just adopted a lifestyle like that, saying that, look, I don't want to come in front of this fancy things. I just want to do this, but I want to make sure that I'm having fun. I get satisfaction. So these are people who are just doing things in like, very, like to put it in a, like a crude sense, very, very boring way, but they are at it and they build that mastery, right? So it's a personal preference based on inspiration and some like, like initial exposure that you get, right? As opposed to saying that, and there is a little bit of everything that a founder needs to have as a generalist. It's a choice that people have.
Wonderful. One question that I can see from Mr. Pranab Kumar, he says SaaS is the way to go forward. And also we need to take into consideration of future customers who might be are the end customers of SaaS tools. So how do you anticipate the behavior of global customers? Because a product in SaaS is not in a particular geography. It can go and hit anywhere else, right? So how do you take in consideration of this kind of dynamic variations in terms of different aspects and different geography and still ensure that the product fits well everywhere?
So Hiranmay, we were speaking about Social Pilot, which is a
It's Ahmedabad-based startup, right? Yeah.
company, right? And Social Pilot is somebody that we work with, and they are roughly about 1.5 million to 2 million in the last 3 years that they spent time with us, and they went from 100K to get there. So Jimit actually started the company 10 years ago, and they used to build mobile apps, and they were exceedingly good at it. But then what they saw is that the mobile apps space had become so crowded that what used to be a premium billing of more than $50 or even $100 started becoming $10 or $15, and they started losing revenue. But in this time period, one of their customers said, "Hey, I want this particular project to be built, and can you build this for me? And I don't mind if you give this to other customers also, because I want it really in a cost-effective way." Right? So this is literally how Social Pilot got started.
Yeah.
Right? This was because they were working with a set of customers, and the customer said that here is a need. He built it for them. He took it to other customers, and then they said, "Okay, you know what? This makes sense. We can give it to more customers." And then, like in the Upekkha context, we just changed the framing into saying that instead of focusing on features, let's focus on value. Instead of focused on saying I will give the most cheapest way possible, we said let's make sure that we are delivering the value and price the value, and that is what has led them to kind of grow from where they were to where they are right now. So the ideas can be coming from any place, right? And most useful one in terms of ideas that come is when they come from the customers themselves. You end up spending very little time on doing wrong iterations, right? So that is that is one specific example that I gave you. But if you take any startup that we are working with, or many startups that I have seen, they have some sort of customer need that has driven or guided the development of the product. If we don't keep the customer in the loop, then we may be thinking that we are building something of great benefit, but it doesn't cross the value bridge, right? And unless you cross the value bridge, you're not able to build a business around it. It only becomes like an expensive hobby.
Wonderful. One question I can see in the chat box is, while you build a global standard SaaS product, are there some compliance standards one need to take care of?
See, the word compliance means that if you don't comply with this, then there is a penalty to it, right? So there are few things that you can think about it in such way. One is that if you are building a global product these days, GDPR becomes very, very important. Then if you are incorporated as a company, and if you are incorporated globally, let's say you're incorporated in US, then you need to follow a certain accounting standard in how you recognize revenue. But I guess that's not the question like original intent is. In terms of compliance, what I would say is that the expectation of a global audience is that they expect well-designed products, right? Products that they can use themselves. And this is where there is a different set of expectation from an Indian audience versus a global audience. So one of the things that we often have discussions with our founder is that if you're designing a website, make sure there are not a single spelling mistake in your website if you are focusing for a global audience. Because if you had a spelling mistake, then you can be rest assured that that customer, after looking at the website, will never ever come back to you, right? Because the way a global audience thinks is that if you can't even put attention to detail to correct your spelling mistakes, then what good your quality of software is going to be. And that perception hurts in a pretty big way. But an Indian audience cares less. Indian audience actually cares more for the value that you are able to do based on the cost that you are incurring for them, right? The cost that they are incurring for you, right? So they are very, very value conscious, and they will completely like not even look at these spelling mistakes or small mistakes that you make. Even if you slip your schedules by a little bit, they'll not be worried about it, because they care more about the relationship that they have with you. Right? So from a global audience perspective, one is that the design, do it yourself, and making sure that there are no spelling mistakes. These are some unsaid rules that one has to keep in mind when designing for a global audience.
Wonderful. Would you like to move on to your next part, or should I take some more questions?
We can take questions. I don't have specific slides. I just have one last question, which I will run towards the end of the session.
Wonderful. So I have a few questions in mind. So we talked a lot about SaaS and the entire game story and attributes and all. And you rightly mentioned, when we used to have an informal chat in the beginning of the session, that the only way entrepreneurs or the ecosystem makes value is by exit, right? Or getting the further round of funds and other market access. Now, would you like to throw a little bit about how that segment of ecosystem building is happening in India, at what stage we are? Would you like to give a broad highlighting on where do we stand in that context? Because as you rightly mentioned, everything that we give to a startup like fund and mentoring and incubator and accelerators and all blah, blah, blah is an input, and input doesn't matter. The output matters, which creates value. So where do we stand today?
So Hiranmay, before Upekkha, I used to run a program called M&A Connect, and Startup Bridge was one of the initiatives that became the foundation, right?
Sorry, Startup Bridge was the program?
Yeah, Startup Bridge became its own foundation, but it was a spin-off of something called M&A Connect that I used to run.
Okay.
It's part of a think tank, and that was a program within the think tank. And the job of that program was to find out in the last decade how many M&As had happened in India, and like what were some of the challenges to that. So in 2017, the way I used to frame this is to say that in 2007 to 2017, about $16 billion of venture investment has gone. Right? If you take 2007, not even 100 million or 200 million of venture investment into entire India had happened. But as years went by and much closer to 2017, about 16 billion got invested into the ecosystem. And the amount of exit that had happened by then included companies like Myntra, included companies like Freecharge, and things like that, right? And when we added that up, and this is a report that we used to generate, I authored this report, there the macro statement was for $16 billion of venture investment, only $4 billion had gone into exit, right? And usually the way to look at something like this is to say, what is the internal IRR for measuring the effectiveness of any asset class, right? And for venture investment is roughly about 15 to 20% minimum, right? Why venture class is considered great is it can even generate up to 60% of internal rate of return. Now, for $16 billion, $4 billion is what had gone out. Now, in the same time period in US, about $249 billion had been invested and $252 billion had exited, has been created as exit. Now, these numbers, like I said, is the right way to look at is IRR. But if in a certain year, the amount of investment that is going in and the amount of investment that is going out, if it is roughly the same, then we know that it is a healthy ecosystem. But here is the lopsided view, right? So 16 billion and then 4 billion. And of course, after 2017, something very interesting happened, which is the $17 billion acquisition of Flipkart happened, right? So the equation was solved at a macro level, right? Where $21 billion of exit had happened and for like $16 billion of investment that went in. But before that, the $4 billion, it actually follows a power law, which means that for every $1 billion acquisition, there will be 100 million. For every 100 million, there will be 110 million acquisition. And if you plot it, it will look like a power law. But that the 4 billion, most of it was done in only 8 deals that had happened by that. And the mean of any acquisition that had happened was 300K. And average angel investment was was about 300K. So what this means is that when in India, when exits were happening, these acqui-hires were happening, the long tail of exits that were happening, they were not returning any money back to the angel investors also. How will it even return any money to the founder? So I used to joke and say that this is power law's power law. And at a macro level, it is not working. And at a founder level, it is not working. Now, Flipkart changed the story. Flipkart changed the macro level, but at the micro level, at the tail level, it still is not working. Lot of acqui-hire that happens that doesn't return money to the angel investors itself. How will it return money to the founders? And that led us to creating this program and saying that a lot of Indian startups should get global audience, because if that discovery doesn't happen, then that's why a lot of investment, a lot of exit doesn't happen. Now, to put this in perspective again with Israel, I gave you the US number. In Israel, $16 billion of investment in the same 2007 to 17 had happened, but it had $19 billion of exit, roughly about that, right? So Israel and US as an ecosystem was a well-functioning ecosystem when it comes to dollar going in, dollar coming out, but India did not have that. Now, to say why had to we create this program and these things changing, it is still a work in progress. It has not fundamentally changed yet. And one of the beliefs that we have within Upekkha is to also make sure that we are able to fan this trend a little better in solving the long tail of exits. For that, I'll have to tell a story on M&A, on how M&A works. But does this cover the ecosystem part that you are asking?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, done. Yeah, I think it's a broad perspective. So, would you like to share one use case maybe to just illustrate this scenario?
Of illustrate the scenario of cross-border.
Any good M&A SaaS?
Sure. So one of my favorite stories is a close friend of mine. We've known each other for about a decade. He ran a company called Kuliza in 2011, and in 2014 or 15, he spun it out into a product company called Botmetric, which is about reducing cloud spend management. And this was one of the companies we had taken to Stanford, Silicon Valley to do the Startup Bridge India conference. And through those initial introductions, they eventually got exited in 2018 for more than $50 million of exit. Now, things like this happen very, very regularly for Israel, right? Because people are able to discover. But in India, that discovery doesn't happen. Right? And some of the discovery happened through Startup Bridge. It also happened through the other investors that he had. They had relationship with AWS, and from India they had built a great cloud management platform, cloud security optimization platform, and that was the great fit for a Indian founder-led public company called Nutanix. They found a match, and that led to an exit. If they were not discoverable, right, then the chances of happening this would have been much lesser. And if they were talking to even big doyens in India like Infosys, Wipro, they would have not gotten anywhere closer to the multiple or the exit value that Nutanix was able to offer them.
Wonderful.
That's one. There are several others. So there's a company called Shield Square that was acquired by a Israeli public company called Radware. Then there is a company called CloudCherry that was acquired by Cisco last year. So there are a lot of B2B SaaS companies now that are getting acquired by large strategic. And there are a lot more smaller P-led acquisitions that are happening. Specific one being a HR tech company called Recruiter Box that was acquired by a PE called Turn River Capital. Then there is a company based out of Hyderabad called Report Garden that was acquired by one of his largest competitor, and that was a good outcome and an exit for founder. One of the things that I have noticed is the B2B exits, they create a lot of wealth for founders, meaningful wealth for founders, but they don't get reported in our mainstream media because they are not billion-dollar valuation. Right? So what gets reported in media is only a billion-dollar valuation or fundraise. And one of the founders that I know, he describes it like this, right? So if you raise a lot of valuation, it is like you have eaten full stomach before you are making a trekking. There is nothing to celebrate about it, right? You have to finish the trek, right? And if you have more food than you can handle, you will find it difficult to take the trek. But that's what our ecosystem right now finds it fancier to celebrate.
Oh, wonderful. In fact, you rightly mentioned, sometimes our page 3 perception is placed in such a way that we believe somebody who has infused funds with a larger valuation gives a certificate that you are going right, which is not necessarily. You rightly mentioned many times the surfers are naked after a certain point of time. if the unit economics and the game is not fixed at the right point and right position. And this is very interesting. In fact, Rajan, the interesting point which comes to my mind after listening to you is there are a lot of structural engagements of incubators, accelerators, and funding and all these things happening in the country. I think there are very less interface or platforms who are actually trying to make these marriages possible, right, in terms of M&A and values. And I think therein a strong intervention and systemic efforts, both from private sector, regulatory agencies, and public systems can add value, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because then probably how many M&As in mid-level startups you see what's happening in this country these days?
So I like to focus on cross-border M&A, and one of the mission for the program that I ran, that I've carried over to Value SaaS as a personal mission, is to go from single digits in a year to double digits in I would say go from 10 to 12 in a year to 100 in a year, right? We still are only seeing 10 to 12 in a year. What Israel does is it does at least 100 in a year, right? And it does at least one cross-border $1 billion exit, right? And that's how Israel has been able to position itself. What they do is they build the product and the engineering, and then they open their first business office in New York, much closest to NASDAQ and NYSE. Right? And they either are trying to go public or they open the office in the West Coast and Bay Area to make sure that they have built the relationship with the right strategics.
So that's the secret sauce?
That's the secret sauce for them. But post-COVID, that formula may not work.
But if the secret sauce is so open and not so secret, then why can't India cooperate? What's the problem? Is it because we don't have good product managers, product designers, or build can't?
I have a theory for this, Hiranmay, and this comes from my experience of working at Intuit and also the previous roles that I've done working with a lot of founders. Is we have this mirage of a local market.
Yeah.
Right. Our markets are global. Right. Our IT services industry contributes more than $130 billion in revenue. Right. And adds up a significant boost to our GDP. And they do it sitting in India, solving custom design projects for the rest of the world, right? And what the last 10 years of VC industry has focused on is saying that, look, don't solve global problems, solve local problems, right? Local problems, it creates a lot of momentum, but it doesn't create the kind of value that solving a global problem does. And what is very, very interesting, and this is something that I've said multiple times in the past, is 10 years ago, or even like not about 10 years ago, today, 1 out of every $2 billion enterprise company based out of US has an Indian founder. $1 billion revenue I'm talking about has an Indian founder. 10 years ago, they set up their back offices in India. Thanks to SaaS, they can now set up the front office also in India, because from India, you can sell to the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Right? As Indian entrepreneurs, we know how to build software. We know how to sell software. When we take the Indian entrepreneur, put them into Valley, they are able to create $1 billion companies. Right? And when they're sitting in US, they're building for the entire world. They're not only building it for US, they're building it for Middle East, Southeast Asia, including India, and for US. Right? I think we need this global mindset because we have the skill set, and go after the largest market possible. Software as an industry is $650 billion, Hiranmay, right? And more than 70% of that comes from North America. So we need to build for where the markets are, using advantages that we have, and we as Indian citizens know to build software and software product way better than anybody else in the world. And that has been proven by just 10 years of data of Indians sitting in Valley and building those $1 billion businesses. So this push to say that solve local problem is what has stopped us from designing a global business and designing those wonderful global brands. Because earlier the IT services used to only build the components, they never built brands, right? For us to go higher up in the value chain, we need to build global brands. But this is me, Hiranmay. Different people have different view. I believe in building global brands and that's where I feel the opportunity is.
And true, in fact, Rajan, that what you were saying is, and your argument is based on empirical facts. It's not a personal feeling. And what you rightly mentioned is sometimes the mirage of solving local problem. Ultimately, an entrepreneur does not need to look at what's inside the white box, right? What's inside the black box. Ultimately, these are the signals that you send in and sent out, and what's the kind of problem that we solve. And then if a customer is sitting, and this is what Giri's says when press this, that if my sales cycle, if I'm in Bangalore, if I go and sell, probably the sales cycle is bigger than anything that I sell in Brazil or somewhere else. So it doesn't matter what kind of border that I need to cross through. And I think technology today, and particularly after cloud and all the digital interfaces that has come up, I think this is going to be facilitating it more rather than creating blockages. So I think that's the way, and very beautifully you mentioned is how entrepreneurs can not aim to have back offices in India, but have front offices in India. And that is going to be very, very sentimentally, morally boosting to our ecosystem. And I think that's good.
My most favorite company, Hiranmay, believe it or not, is Social Pilot.
Social Pilot?
Yes, right?
Because
they have defied all the conventional wisdom that the Indian startup ecosystem has. One is that IT services founder cannot build a product, right? You can't build a product from Ahmedabad, right? And here is Jimit, right? And here is Stages, who sitting out of Ahmedabad have built a global SaaS brand. And they are like one of the top 3 or 4 when it comes to the social media marketing space. Like Buffer, Hootsuite, and Agora Pulse are the other 3. Right?
Yeah.
Now, they are not as big as Freshworks yet, but they can get there, right? Right now, it is not clear. I mean, it was not clear when they started out, how will they get to where they are today, right? So they have just defied everything. And this ability to build software is our strength. And if we just get the right guidance of saying that from India, how can we build that brand also? How can we make sure that we have carved it out as product and we can sell it sitting from wherever we are, having the front office here? That means that you have all the things that are necessary to build a global SaaS brand.
I think you rightly mentioned, I know Tejas and Jimmy since at least a decade now, and they had a different startup before. And Tejas was more of an evangelist than getting it down. And then once we had a coffee meeting with our dear friend Prasanna in Ahmedabad, and he came during the Gujarat investment meetup in Vibrant Gujarat. And that small coffee chat triggered something. And the next day, this guy said, no, we don't want to do this 1 to 10. Go from 10 to 100. And you guys really made it. So I think the significant value that you added is not only a mindset change, but also the kind of guidance that you guys give, kind of tools that you enable with. So having said that, would you a little bit, because more people are more curious to know about your work and your organization, would you like to a little bit elaborate about what Upekkha does and what are the kind of things that you are doing?
Right. Sure. So Upekkha, we call this as a value SaaS catalyst. In fact, we say we are slightly different from an accelerator, because accelerator programs usually just spend 3 months. And the best definition of accelerator is something that I heard from the YC founder, Paul Graham. He says it helps you find your focus. Helps you find your focus, right? That's the job of an accelerator. But over a period of time, he's also been very disappointed with how YC turned out, in the sense that YC only helped find the focus on increasing valuation. Before you get into YC, you are 1 million in valuation. After you get into YC, you are 12 million in valuation, right? So it's really like what happened in the 3 months is not clear, but it is led to a 3x or a 4x or a 12x jump in the valuation. But what Paul actually meant is that find that focus of that one customer that you should be going after, in whose life you are adding value. So in early days, it was only about saying ship and make sure that you're talking to customers enough to get the value. Now, the way ecosystem evolved is to say that let's just shove them down the unicorn path, right? And Prasanna and I have worked with tons of founders in the last many years, right? And what we have seen is when it comes to doing the same thing for Indian founders, especially on the B2B context, it leads to disastrous results, right? You get an overvaluation, and then you're trying to make sure that your business then catches up to that overvaluation. And always the focus is on saying, okay, how do I raise my next round and so on. The reason I say this is that we found this and we said that this is not going to create any meaningful outcomes for the founders. We said we have to step back and look at it from first principles and redesign it. Instead of creating a 3-month program, we said we will create a year-long, 2-year-long program. We'll take startups at when they are about 100K and we will help them get to the 1 million journey. Because the mortality rate for startups is highest in this range, right, between the 100K and the 1 million. So we designed the first program, which is the Value SaaS Flywheel program, to say that let us help you get to 1 million in less than 200K of any external investment. This doesn't mean that the business doesn't have to invest more than 200K. It is any kind of external investment. You will reinvest into the business, right? You may end up spending 500, 600K to get to that 1 million, but getting from outside, it has to be less than 100K, less than 200K, right? So Upekkha's first program that we have is called the Value SaaS Flywheel program, where we take startups where they are already about $100,000 in revenue. And over a course of 2 years, we get them to about $1 million in revenue. Because once you get there, then you can decide whether you want to build a rocket ship company or whether you can find a space where you can exit like how Minjar did, right? And that depends on the market that you're going after. Some markets, like how Girish is building, can lead you to building 200 million ARR business and furthermore. But some markets may be limited, and some markets, due to strategic reasons, may lead you to have a better of option as getting an exit. So he said, let's get you 1 million in less than 200K of any type of investment. Then it is hard to argue that you don't have product market fit. You don't necessarily need like any external investment. You have proven that you have generated $1, more than $1 for the dollar that you've invested. After that, let's decide fundraise or let's decide exit path. Right. So that's been our overall focus. Now we have about 48 startups that we are working with, and about 44 of them are in the 0.1 to the 1 million journey, and about 4 of them are in the 1 to 10 million journey, or whether they should navigate an exit. We are 3 years old, and we run a cohort every 6 months. Our first cohort was 4 startups, and 3 out of the 4 startups got to that 1 million journey, and all of them are profitable. All the startups that are there within Upekkha, we instill this belief saying that no compromise with unit economics. Get the unit economics first, and then only step the gas of growth. We fundamentally believe that bootstrapping versus VC funding is a false dichotomy. It's about right capital at the right stage, and make sure that we optimize for a meaningful founder outcome rather than just saying that I need to just find that one startup which will be like Flipkart that will return the entire investment effort that somebody makes. So we are driven by creating meaningful founder outcome, and that's our North Star. And it's been a fun ride for the last 3 years.
So how does the startups apply on online to website or how?
Yes. So we do 2 cohorts every year around Feb and July, August time frame. And about 2 months before the start of the cohort, we open applications. Yes, upekkha.io/apply is the place to go and apply for it.
In fact, one interesting thing I used to discuss with Prasanna before COVID BC, I used to ask him, you run an accelerator without meeting these guys. He says that the world is going to be the same, just wait and watch. And I never realized that COVID is going to come and everybody will work remotely, And I think this was also a very, very phenomenal step that you took, you guys, How can you create and enable and guide the same value to your portfolio companies, even if remotely? And I'm sure they come to, I have been to your boot camps once, and I see the kind of value that you create. And I think one of the distinctive things that you do in your program is you let the people realize their value and drive it. So that's very important. It is not an inorganic chemical synthesis that something is forced open, but rather it is self-discovery with a goal and then driving it inside out. And I think that really helps entrepreneurs. And the beauty that you said about is all of these companies are profitable. They are not topi companies. They are not, Excel sheet companies. They're really creating value, and they will create value. So I think that's very interesting. So I think everybody enjoyed their session today. I mean, thanks to Prasanna and the entire team, Madhumita, and all of you really helped us to get a lot of insights. And many people are saying in the Facebook Live that they got a dozen quotes to put in the world today. And thanks to your own hands-on insights, being an entrepreneur and then taking it. So having seen these kind of insights, we were a little interested more about your journey. How have you made? What have been your experiences of building companies and now doing these things?
Sure. So Upekkha, we started it in 2017. Prasanna initially started it and I joined later. Before that, like I mentioned, I used to run a program called M&A Connect and Startup Bridge as a foundation. So the M&A Connect program was part of a think tank called iSpirit, and I was one of the 3 co-founders for that. And I joined that to solve the M&A problem, the cross-border M&A problem. There are lot that has been solved, but the bottlenecks have moved to different places. And before that, I was with a company called Intuit, the makers of QuickBooks. I used to introduce this as Tally for the rest of the world. It's bigger than Tally in US and many other countries. I spent 6 years there as a product leader, and I also used to drive innovation initially at Intuit. And prior to that, I ran a B2C company, in which what I built was something very similar to Periscope on Twitter. So you could use a phone to live stream. So that was between 2007 and 2011. It had about 1.5 million users. Those were times when there was no crazy VC ecosystem and crazy valuation and things like that. And before that startup, I also worked in another startup called Amused, which used to make some of the video recorders, first video recorders on a Nokia phone. And that startup got acquired and folded into what is now known as Aricent. And I started my journey with a company called Sapient. So I have this journey of going from a computer sciences engineer from IIIT Hyderabad to doing IT consulting at Sapient, then doing system software at Amused, then building a B2C startup, which was my own, and then moving on to Intuit, which is where I learned a lot about product management. It's one of the best companies in the world where you can learn product management. But I always had this penchant or this unsolved need of getting more exits, right? I mean, I tell folks that there is one thing to build a great product, but another complete different thing to build great product business. How do you generate $1 out of $1, more than $1 from $1? But then also that when exits happen, they are not anchored to the revenue. Right? So how these are 2 different ways of creating business value out of the products that you build. And more I spent time in this, I found that the M&A part is a lot more dark art than there is any science. In fact, generating business also, there are a lot of fundamentals, but again, it's a lot more art. So these 2 aspects excite me a lot, right? And I've worked with a lot of founders and helping them build those global brands so that there can be like a non-linear impact in their lives is what kind of drives me. These are the experiences that shaped me to do this.
Wonderful. And this non-linear impact everybody would like to have in their life. Nobody wants to have a predictive life in which you put input in 2020 and get output in 2040. Exactly the curve is designed. So I think you guys are doing a wonderful job, and all the people who participated today in the session really liked it. Meanwhile, I shared the link of your book to everybody from Amazon, and they all, this PDF Value SaaS guide, they can probably download from the link, and I'm sure they will get it from Kindle. They will learn a lot. And thank you so much for joining today and sparing an hour to give us new thoughts. There's a lot of thoughts that we need to digest even after the session is over live.